Networking and Security in iOS Apps by Professor Don Patterson and Sam Kaufman. In this lecture, we're going to just dip our toe into the idea of push notifications coming from a remote source. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on learning how to use remote notifications on the device side, and we're going to rely on a company called Parse.com to provide the infrastructure. So we'll see how remote notifications are executed and what it feels like to receive them in the iOS platform, but we're not going to build the infrastructure out in the cloud in order to send them ourselves. Now, generally, the idea of a remote notification is to tell the users of your application that there's something that they need to attend to on their device, but that gets initiated from somewhere else in the world. So you could imagine any kind of crazy Internet of Things scenarios where you have a security camera and someone opens your door and you want to alert the user. So you could have a server in your home send a push notification to your app to alert them that the door has been opened. Or you could send a push notification telling you that a delivery has arrived, or that someone has rung your doorbell, or that something is available. Any number of things that are possible. Parse.com builds this infrastructure for you, and we're going to leverage it. And that's going to require a lot of steps, though. And in fact, it's going to require some steps that I want you to see, but we're not going to actually assess you on, because it requires you to have a developer account with the Apple developer ecosystem. That usually costs $99 a year, at least it did when I signed up for it earlier this year. It's good for 1 year, and it enables you to put things into the iTunes Store. It's only necessary if you want to actually put things in the iTunes Store, but it's also necessary if you want to be able to receive remote push notifications. So we won't require it, but we'll show you how to do it. So at a high level, as we've seen in local notifications can also be, that look the same, can also be delivered from a remote location, and those are remote notifications. It's possible to set up your own infrastructure so that your web server is sending notifications, but we're going to use Parse.com, which is a third-party company that I don't have any affiliation with, that will send notifications to you. There are probably others that will do the same thing. So we're going to show you how to use this service for remote notifications, focusing on the aspects that are specific to the iOS side. So at a high level, here's kind of the scenario that we're working with. There is a device that is going to be running your app, and that's connected to the Apple Web Services. So the same kinds of connections that travel over Wi-Fi or over the cellular data network, that deliver your iMessage messages, that tell you that you have an iTunes update, a lot of the different services that are available from the Apple Cloud, Photos, Backup, etc. There's a connection from your phone that goes over whatever network you're on to the Apple Web Services. And that's not any different for the remote notifications. Remote notifications come from Apple. And so in order to get a notification to go to your device, someone has to push that notification through the Apple Cloud. And so we're going to rely on Parse Web Services to push that notification to the Apple Cloud and then to the device. And then on the very end of it is a computer with a browser, a web browser in it, that we will use to manually generate some of these notifications. Why might you want to do this? Well, it's a good way to create engagement with your app. If you would like to contact the users of your application and let them know that something has changed, there's an update, some new news, you can do it with a push notification. Do it carefully, though, because it risks annoying your users and having them turn off the permission to receive remote notifications. So here's the flow. You start by purchasing a developer account with Apple. That happens on the Apple website. It's something that the developer does. The developer can do it on their own or as part of an organization. If you happen to be part of a university or a college, or I think even a K through 12, I think, your university, your place of higher education can sign up for a university account that will enable you to do some of these things for free if your university qualifies for the program. Today, we're going to see a paid developer account doing that. After you purchase your account with Apple, then you go onto your device ecosystem and you start creating your Xcode application. You need to make sure that when you create it with notification capabilities, and you need to give it a unique identifier in that initial page, because that unique identifier is going to be how Apple recognizes your application. Once you've done that, you've started your Xcode program, you're going to go back to the Apple website, and you're going to create what's called a Developer SSL certificate with Apple that's going to come with push permissions. That requires your application identifier, and so that's why we have to do it in that order. Once you've received that developer certificate, you're going to take that over to the Parse website. You'll need a Parse account, and you are going to give Parse this authorization via this certificate to enable them to send messages to your application. Unless they have authorization that you've gotten from Apple and given to them, they can't just send out messages to any phone. So you'll give that to Parse, and in response, Parse is going to give you some credentials that you're going to take and put into a pod file interface that we're going to be working with. So we'll put that into our Xcode project, those Parse credentials, so that now our application is identified with our application is identified with Apple, and we have the appropriate permissions from Parse as well. Once all those things are done, we're going to finish developing the app, and users are going to install the app. Users are happily running our app, very satisfied, and then it comes time for you to need to push a notification. So you go to the Parse website, and you generate a notification, probably manually, a push notification, using their services, using a web browser, and you activate it. That notification has been validated because you, as a developer, have authenticated with Parse, and you are targeting your app, the target app, the one that you've made, has been identified with an Apple certificate. So that notification is going to pass through successfully through all these gatekeepers. Once that notification is triggered, it gets sent to Apple, and then Apple is going to confirm that the notification is authenticated by looking at that signature. Once it has confirmed that, it's going to go ahead and find all of the devices that are running the appropriate app, and it's going to broadcast the notification to the appropriate ones. Subset, individual ones, depends on the situation. If the user has authorized remote notifications, has allowed them to appear, then that notification will show up on the phone. And it will look the same as the local notification that we programmed earlier. It's just going to be generated by a remote event. And there's different things we have to do within the body of Xcode in order to support it. So here's at a high level the different steps that have to happen in order for us to do this. There's a lot of moving pieces. You have to do them in the right order. It's not particularly difficult. It's just that there's sort of an ordering and a permissions process that we're laying out here. There are 2 pages of these steps, and I've specified them in 2 different colors. The blue or darker color indicates that it's something that you do on a website or through a browser or through something outside of your code base. The orange steps represent something that you're doing within your code base, within your application, within Xcode. So the first thing that we do is we make a developer account with Apple on a website. Then we start making the app with Parse CocoaPod installed, making sure that it has push capabilities. Then we go to the website, we create a development SSL certificate with Apple. Then we bring that back to our computer and we install it in our local keychain. We then register our app with Parse and get Parse credentials. And then we pull those permissions back, and we install them in our Xcode project. Within our project, we request permission from the user to receive remote notifications once the app is running. If we receive that permission, we register that permission with the Parse CocoaPod locally. Then we create a handler to receive those remote notifications. Then we run our application, and while our application has been registered and it's on someone's phone, if we send a notification with Parse, it'll trigger a notification. So our goal here is to go through all those steps and to actually generate a notification with Parse and see it pop up on the simulator. So here we go. The first step is going to be to make a developer account with Apple. Our first step is to go to the Apple website and create a developer account. So let's just go there real quick and show you what that looks like. Now, one thing that's kind of important to do is it's important that we actually use Safari in order to do this work on the developer.apple website, developer.apple.com, because some of the things that you do when interacting with the Member Center require the Safari web browser, or at least it doesn't work on Chrome. So if you run into trouble, it might be because you're using the wrong browser. I'm a Chrome person, but for the purposes of this, I use Safari. So I go to the Member Center. I have several accounts depending on my role as a professor or as part of different organizations. This account here is my individual developer account. So when I log in there, you can see that I have an account. In order to get this to this far, you have to pay Apple money. $99 a year is the current rate. And you can see that information located here. Programs and add-ons, you can see I'm part of the Apple Developer Program, and then what we're going to come back for is that certificate identifiers and profiles page. Okay, so that is our developer account with Apple. The next thing that we need to do is we need to start a new Xcode project that uses the parse CocoaPod, and we need to give it push capabilities. So let's do that. Go to Xcode, and we will create a new project. Our new project is going to be a single view project. This isn't going to be a UI intensive project. And we're going to give it a name. We will call it the Parse Pushy app. Go ahead and add H there, Parse Pushy app. I'm going to get myself in trouble. And give it an identifier. This identifier is important, so I'm going to copy it. Usually these identifiers are URLs in reverse format, but what they do is they are there to uniquely identify an application. The combination of the organization identifier actually and the product name is what defines it. So I'm going to just go ahead and do, call this remote actually. All right, it's Objective-C and it's universal. And I copied that organization identifier for use in a second. I'm going to put it into my iOS workspace. And you can see that that bundle identifier is put here. The next thing that I want to do is I want to give this the capability to be a push, receive remote push notifications. So that we can do that here. In order to do this, I'm going to go over and turn it on. But I have to have already created a developer certificate on the Apple developer website. So the place where you would go to do that is back on our website. You come here, and you need an iOS app certificate. If you're using it for development, you make one certificate. If you're using it for production, you use a different certificate. And in this case, the development certificate is already present. It's this one here. If you needed to create one, you could use this button here to create a developer certificate. And that signs, digitally encrypts, digitally creates a cryptographic signature of your app so that it can be known to be linked to your account. It can be linked to your account. I've already got that set up. I've already downloaded it into Xcode. The place where you download that into Xcode is here under Accounts, and here's where I downloaded that certificate. So if you want to download a new account, you would come here and you would hit plus in order to get there. Now that I have this in my Xcode registered though, when I come to push notifications with my new application and I turn it on, it's going to ask me which of my developer accounts do I want to associate it with. I only have one that has the capabilities to do this right now, so I'm going to choose that one. And it's going to add the push notification entitlement to my app ID. So it's going to register my app to be able to work with the Apple Web Services Center to receive push notifications remotely. All right. Great. So now what we need to do is we need to make it CocoaPod aware with parse. So let's do that next. We're going to quit Xcode and switch to Terminal. And we are going to go into the Parse Pushy app. We're going to pod init. Give it a second. Then we're going to edit the pod file that gets created. And we are going to give it a dependency on the parse CocoaPod. And we are going to do single quote tilde greater than 1.9.0. Save it. And then run pod init, pod install. And it should go out and get both bolts, which is another CocoaPod that parse depends on, and then parse itself. We'll go out and we'll get those, and then our project should be CocoaPod aware, and from that point on, we'll open it using the .xc workspace specification. Let's go there. Great. All right. Xcode opens up, it'll index the files. And we're in good shape. Okay. We have enabled our app to be push aware, but now we need to go to the website and deliver the ability for our app to be web. We need to develop a certificate so that other services can send remote notifications to our app. To do that, we need to work with the Keychain program. So what we're working on now is we're now going to work on creating our development SSL cert with Apple, and we're going to need to do that with our local Keychain application. It's a kind of a multi-step process. The first thing we're going to do is open Keychain. In Keychain, we're going to go over here under Certificate Assistant, and we're going to request a certificate from our certificate authority. Now it's important at this point that you see that the menu says exactly request a certificate from certificate authority ... If there's anything else on that line, it means you've selected something in the background of your Keychain Access app. You want to deselect it. You want this kind of pure line in order to request a certificate from a certificate authority, kind of without specifying which one. Here we can specify our user email address. I'm going to go ahead and use the one that I'm registering, that I'm doing this work with. And I'm just going to leave these two fields blank. I'm going to click Saved to Disk because I'm going to upload it to the Apple site. And I'm going to put it into our workspace just so I know where to find it. Okay, I've saved it, I've put it on disk, and now I'm going to go back to the developer website. All right, meanwhile, on the developer website, we're going to come down to our app IDs, and we're going to see that here, Xcode has uploaded our app ID. There are a lot of permissions that have been disabled and enabled. You can see that for development, these things are enabled and disabled, and for distribution, production, these are enabled and disabled. I want to edit this, and I want to enable push notifications in the development configuration. So I'm going to create a certificate for that. This is where I need my certificate signing authority. I'm going to upload that thing that I just created through Keychain. There we go, I'm going to choose it. And I'm going to generate a certificate. And now I'm going to download that certificate, boom, to my computer. Then I'm going to open that certificate in Keychain. So what have I just done? I've enabled, I've created a certificate so that a remote authority can send notifications to my application. I have installed it in my Keychain application, and now I need to download it so that I can give it to Parse, to give Parse the ability to send my app notifications. So if I come here to certificates and I select certificates, and I should be able to search, there we go, by the name of my application to find the certificate. I'm going to right click, nope, I'm going to select it and go up to export items, and I'm going to export it. What's important is that I get the .p12 format of export. I'm going to export that also to my into my hard drive so that I know where to find it. And I'm going to save it. You need to give it a password of some kind. I'm going to give it a particularly bad password. Okay. That was a password for the key. This is to enable Keychain to pull it off of my Keychain. So that was my system password, the second one. And that downloaded it to my computer. All right. So we created a development SSL certificate for our application. We added that certification for our local Keychain, and we exported it in .p12 format in order to register the app with Parse. So registering the app with Parse, that's going to be our next step. Let's register the app with Parse. We're going to go to the parse.com webpage, and from there we are going to log in. And once we're logged in, we're going to register our application. So I already have an account with them. Okay, this was one I was practicing on, so actually I don't want that one. I'm going to create a new app. The name of our new app is, we decided what what did we call it? We called it the, why can't I remember what we just called it? It's so bad. The parse pushy app, that's what we called it. All right, we're going to create it, and we're going to go ahead and go to the settings for it. So this is an interface. This is telling Parse that there is an application that we're going to work with in the future. It has not, that's the application's name. It has not been released in production. There's a bunch of different things here that you can fill out. We don't have a URL. This is a tutorial for Coursera. We don't have an icon. App permission, allow client class creation, fine. User session, fine. Clone the app, fine. Clean up files. Okay, everything's good there. Those are the basic settings for our application. Now what we want to do is we want to go to push. This is where we would actually send out push notifications. So that's where we're going to end up interacting with Parse and the ecosystem at the very end. We haven't given it permission to do that yet, so we're going to click on settings and then push here. Client push enabled means, are you going to allow a different app to push out messages to all the other apps? We're not doing that. REST push is enabled, and we are going to be sending our pushes to iOS and OS X devices, and so we need to upload our certificate to do that. There we go. Oops. Oh, so here's a mistake. When you export your keychain password, you have to export it without a password. So let's try that again, without a password. Okay. Upload it to Parse, great. So here's our certificate, here's our bundle identifier. That gives Parse the permission to send things to the Apple Web Services to send down to us. Okay, and now what we need to do is we need to get information for our client so that we can, here, let me show you what we need to do. All right, so we have registered our app with Parse, and now we need to get the credentials from Parse in order to put into our application on the developer side. So let's do that. All right, we want the application ID and we want the client ID. So we're gonna leave this open just for a second, and then we're gonna come back to it to cut and paste it at the appropriate time. All right, so we now have our Parse credentials ready. We have uploaded our certificate from the keychain. Now we can start doing a little bit of our development. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to request permissions from the user to receive remote notifications. That's our next step. Now it's time to get into the code and work with some of our remote notifications. Now in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a lot of the template code that we had in our local notifications objects. Local notification example lecture. A lot of it's very similar. It's just we're going to change the word local with the word remote. And the other thing that we're going to do is we are going to have to, the object that we get from our remote notification is going to be slightly different. It's going to be a dictionary that gets sent from the remote website. So the structure of it depends, you have to know what the structure is going to be beforehand, but that's okay because you define the structure when you send the message. Okay. So let's request permissions from the user to receive remote notifications. This is within our code. And in this app, very, very simple, what we're going to do is we're going to request those permissions immediately upon launch. So I've got some template code down here. All these we're not going to override, so I'm going to delete them for clarity. And what we're going to do here is we're going to ask our users for permission. So that's not necessary. You'll recognize this code from before where we request different kinds of permissions. We establish a UI user notification type, and we're going to concatenate the alert type, UI user notification type alert, UI user notification type badge, and UI user notification type sound. We're going to do a bitwise OR of those three defined constants, and we're going to assign that to our types variable. And then for our notification settings object, we're going to create that by passing it in those user notification types. I'm not using any of those local notification actions in this case, so my categories are going to be nil. If I had categories or special responses, I would add that in there in the appropriate code to define them. And then the last thing I do is I register those settings with the app, and then slightly differently, I register for remote notifications. Now, one thing that we have to do differently with remote notifications that we didn't do with local notifications, although we could have, is we can see what the result is of us asking the user to give us remote notifications. Now we need to do that because we're working with this CocoaPod that is going to register some information that comes back from the operating system when we do that. So we're going to ask for permission. If the user gives us permission, we're going to keep some information about that permission from the operating system. So there is another callback, as you can imagine. Callbacks, callbacks, callbacks. And we're going to add that in our app delegate, and it will be called by the operating system when the time comes. It is called did register for remote notifications with device token, and it's that device token that we're trying to get our hands on. When it comes back as a parameter, we're going to use the PF installation class, PF installation here. We're going to get the current installation of our parse framework. And then we're going to set our device token that we receive back from our data to the device token that we received. So this is going to put that device token into our shared library so that we can work with it when we do our push notifications. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to ask parse to save that in the background. Now, if all goes well, we shouldn't have any trouble here. We're having some kind of a issue. Oh, we're having an issue because we put it before the end. That's our first issue. And our second issue looks like we're having a problem because probably PF installation is not being used, I imagine. Yep. That's because up here we haven't made our code aware of the library that we've got. So we're going to import parse/parse.h. The library is included in our directory, but this is going to make it so this file in particular can call those files, can call those functions. When we do that, we're all set. All right. So we requested permissions from the user to receive remote notifications. We put that in the app delegate file. So that's going to happen, is that attempt to get permission is going to happen right when that program launches. We registered that permission with the parse CocoaPod by capturing that callback function after the user selects. If it's successful, then it will call back that function we made, and we pass the device token to the parse framework. The last thing we need to do is we need to create a handler in order to receive the notifications. And the other thing is we didn't initialize our parse framework. We need to initialize our parse framework with those secrets that were available from the parse website. So let's do that next. So the first thing we'll do is let's initialize our library with the secrets that we got. We'll do that right when we finish launching. Configure our parse parameters, and these are not the right ones. So we want the application and the client key, and we're going to get those from the parse website. Here is our application ID. And we need our client key. There we go. So we call that in the beginning to initialize our library. We ask for permissions. If we get permissions, we save the device token to our library. Okay, now when when a remote notification gets passed to our phone and when the user interacts with it, it's going to cause our application to start. And so we need to capture that event. And there are two different ways that it can start. If our application is not running at all, then it's going to start by did finish launching with options, and in which case we're going to do a similar process to what happened when we had a local notification. If our process is running, if our app is running or it is suspended, but still in memory, frozen, then we're going to have a special remote callback function that we need to handle. So let's start with the case with did finish launching with options when we receive a remote notification and we are not running at all. We're going to start with the exact same code that we had when we were doing our local notifications. We'll put that at the beginning here. First thing we'll do is we'll check. Now it's not a local notification. We're not doing local notification, so we need to change that. And so instead of a local notification, it's going to be a remote notification key. And instead of receiving a UI local notification, we're going to receive an NS dictionary. The format to be determined. And we'll call it our remote notification. Right? If it's not nil, then it means that we started as a result of a remote notification. Great. And in which case, we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to say, okay, we want to get, let's get the message, a message that we passed from the parse website to our application. Let's see if we can pull that out. So in the data payload, let's see if we can, from a remote notification, let's get a message. And that's going to be equal to remote notification, select trying to select object with key. What do I do? Get object. Okay, we'll just use the other format. We're going to get the element in this dictionary whose key is message. And again, we have to spell the type correctly. Good. And the reason why we're doing that is because we want to set our message equal to whatever our remote message says. Call it remote message. Okay, so we pulled out the remote message from our remote notification object here. And then we created a pop-up menu here that said we received it on launch. We created an action in which we, so the user can click OK and clear it. We added that action to our alert controller, and then we passed that whole chunk to our UI thread so that it could be presented. And then we'll close that if statement, and that will handle the case when our application is not running at all. Now we need to handle the case when our application is running. And in that case, we've got a function that has its unique name, like when we received our applications, like when we received our local notification with actions. And in this case, we are not doing any of that. We have, the function is did receive remote notification, application did receive remote notification. We're given our notification payload in this case, and we're given a completion handler. And so we are going to do the same thing as we did up here. We're going to create a pop-up menu. We're going to get the message, but it's not from our remote, it is going to be from a remote notification. But we're just going to change the name there. All right, so we're going to call it a remote notification as the parameter that comes in. We're going to find the message from it. We're going to say we received while running. It's going to have our message as part of its as part of the window. We're going to clear it with OK. We're going to add that action to our alert controller. We're going to put it on our main loop so that we can present it. Okay. I think that's everything that we need. Let's run it and just see if it runs. Now, there's no user interface, so it's not going to do very much. It should ask us for permission immediately to receive remote notifications, and if all goes well, we'll get that. Build succeeded, we love that. Oh, shoot. We're still recording? Oh no, are we recording? Every now and then it tries to install on my phone, which is recording right now, because I needed to make sure that the destination was the simulator. I think we're still recording, it's all good. Okay. It tried to run it on my phone because my phone's connected to the computer right now because it's helping me to film. Okay, now we're running on the simulator. Gotta wait for the simulator to appear, to show up for us. Join us, simulator. Thank you. All right, it's going to try and send me notifications. These happen to be remote notifications. I'm going to click OK. My app doesn't do anything else. So let's leave this here for a second. When I went to go to the Parse website, I realized that we had one small error in our code. So this is going to go back and correct that error. In our response function here, did we receive remote notification? We used a version of this function that assumes that when we received a remote notification, we want to do something in the background. This piece here indicates that we want to use the version of the function that does something in the background. In fact, we didn't want to do that. So I'm just going to delete that, and our remote function is just going to receive the payload of whatever we send it. So now I'm going to stop the running of it all, and I'm going to run the application with this different receive remote notification function. And everything comes up fine. Okay, done a lot of debugging, and here's what I've learned. I've learned that Parse is unable to send a remote notification to a simulator, and so if you want to do this, you have to do it on an actual device. Right now I'm recording the video from an actual device while I do the run. The other thing I debugged was that the documentation was a little bit off for what Parse provided. If you want to pull out the notification that you send when you send a text message, you need to pull out a dictionary called APS, and then from that you need to pull out the key alert. This together will provide you what you need in order to get the message from the notification from Parse that you can put in the message here. All right. So with that, we should be able to go to the Parse website, send a push notification. We will send, "This is my final message. I hope it's true," in plain text, as we note here, to all of our devices. We send it, and we see that the remote message shows up on my device. I click it, I open my device, and I received it on launch that this is my final message. Great. That was when it was in, when the device was not open, when the application was not running. So now I want to do it once when the application is running, sending it as plain text, sending it now, and we see we get our push notification while running. Great. Boy, that was a lot of work for me to figure out what was going on with my recording setup that was causing it to break. Hopefully now there's enough information here that if you wanted to set it up on your own, you can, but of course you'll need a developer account and an actual device in order to do that. Okay, put this to bed. Thank you for your attention.